Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 78, Lead Distribution, What, How, Why. And before we sort of get into this, we should probably say that we had the conversation before we start these podcasts, just a very loose one, sort of working out a roadmap we're going to talk about in a general sense. As we were doing it for this one, we kind of realised there are loads of things we could talk about. It's probably quite a big subject, so we'll see where we end up. There's no strict guideline, but we'll give it a go, and we might have to split it into 2 or 3 different episodes. But as you probably guessed from that title, we're going to give it a more general overview. We're going to work out what lead distribution is, why you need it, and how you use it. And then we'll dive in a little bit deeper and sort of look at some of the nuances. So let's get cracking with that. Simon, what is lead distribution?
So in its simplest form, it's just moving data from A to B effectively. The problem is it just gets a shitload more complicated than that the more you dig into the surface. So what was delivering data from A to B can have a load of conditions and verification and caps and qualification and everything attached to it. We'll not go through that too much because we've covered some of those things like, verification and needing to qualify leads. But I think it's important to separate 2 things here. So there's lead distribution for buyers of leads. So this would be potentially advertisers or brands. I suppose it could apply to agencies in some senses that are delivering leads to another part of their organization. So I'll just use Databall. I'm not trying to push Databall on anyone here. I'm just telling you how people use it, because just as a reference, or you do as well, we all do at Databall, just live and breathe this shit all day, every day. So it's something we see a lot and see all the problems and everything. So on the buyer side, what they would typically do is maybe have a single connection to something like a CRM, a dialer, a database. It could be an ESP, if it's just like email addresses they're collecting or something. And then they might have updates coming back from that system back into something like Databall to move leads around and give different responses out and whatever else. So it's a bit more straightforward when you're dealing buyer side to distribute leads, because there's, it can be like a single endpoint, might be 2, because you could deliver it to different stakeholders. Like we work with a huge mortgage company in the UK, and they have leads. So lead comes in from estate agents of people who have booked to go and view a property, and it gets sent to about 10 different places. They're updating different elements of the organization and moving leads around, but that's quite rare. Now on the lead generators side, we also work with a lot of lead generators, and they do their lead distribution through Databall. It can get far more complicated. So just a sort of cap of what actual lead distribution happens and why it's more complicated, these are the mechanisms that you can use to deliver leads. So first you have weighted forwarding, which is basically, imagine you had 1 lead coming in and you were going to send it to 5 different buyers. And lead generators tend to work with like many buyers for a single lead. So 1 lead comes in and they'll have 5 different APIs. Let's imagine it's all on APIs. We can cover stuff that isn't APIs in a bit. What they'll do is say, okay, send 20% to this buyer, 20% to this buyer, 20% here, and 20% here, up to 100%. And so every lead that comes in is splitting it between the 5 buyers. But that could be in any order you want. So one might have 10%, another might have 90%. And only if they get rejected would it fall into like a bottom pool of another buyer. So you can set all these different weighted priority forwardings up to deliver leads. Another is based on costs. So it's just like the person who'll pay the most gets the lead. So just have it in a sort of order. So if this one accepts it, just deliver it to them. If they reject it, deliver it here. So all this works off the internal like qualification and verification you set up, and it also works off the APIs that you're sending it to. So if the API of your client responds, I reject this lead for whatever reason, it goes to the next buyer and next buyer and next buyer. So you can do weighted, you can do priority, you can also do multi-sell. So this is much more like a comparison site. So a lead comes in, you have 4 buyers or 3 buyers, and you send it to all of them. And the person who is the lead understands they're going to be getting like 3 calls or 3 emails from 3 different companies, giving them a quote for whatever products or services that they've inquired about. Another one is ping post. It's not something we do, but it's basically a lead comes in, you grab it a snippet of the information. So it could be something like postcode, surname, an email address, let's say, and you deliver it to 20 different buyers. And then what happens is they start an auction to decide how much they'll bid, and then the highest bidder gets the lead. The reason we don't do it, and we've covered this on another podcast, and I've spoken about it a few times, is it doesn't actually benefit the consumer, right? Like this isn't to their benefit. This is just whoever is buying the lead. So let's imagine it was for payday loans, because that's a really big consumer of ping post technology. If you'll pay the most for the lead, it means that lead is most valuable to you, which potentially might mean your interest rate's the highest. So you're actually, the reason why you can pay so much and you're winning this auction is actually it's the worst deal for the consumer, but the best deal for you. So that's why we just don't do it. We believe in a reverse of that, which is it should be used for good. So to find, like in that instance I was just talking about, not that I necessarily even believe in payday loans, but if I did, to deliver it to the company with the lowest interest rates. But anyway, we've covered that to death in another podcast, so we can link to that. You can create custom logics. This could just be like, we work with people that have all weird and wonderful routings to deliver leads. And the other is just like a one-to-one. So you've got like one API, lead comes in, it just delivers everything to it. So all these methods that we've talked about, generally they all work in the same way, which is a lead has entered the system. You're verifying all the details in the system. You're making sure it's not like a dupe. You're making sure it's not in a suppression file. You can add caps to see whether this buyer could accept it or not. And then it's working from all that internal logic where it should go, and then it responds to all the API responses that come back of which one it actually goes to. So this is where the lead distribution element gets complicated for lead generators. And you can sort of see from within that why it's much simpler for lead buyers, because they don't necessarily need all those tools to do all this stuff of like working out where a lead should be delivered to. They might use it for like individual sales agents, for example. So you could set up a mechanism where you deliver different types of leads to different sales agents, but typically they're doing that within a dialer or a CRM anyway. So it removes the need to do it in a sort of lead distribution system.
I feel like I need to inject some structure into this, because in my head I've got like about 40 different places, ironically, which we could shoot off to. So what I'm going to try and do is add some structure into this and say, right, for the purpose of this podcast, let's ignore the buying side for the time being, because like you said, it's less complicated. Let's focus in on the lead gen side and give that some attention today. And to set out the point where we're going to go, I'm going to look at why it's so important and how you can benefit from it later. But before we get to that, I think it's worth saying that, like you said yourself, we live and breathe this stuff. It's every single day that we have it, and because of that, we can be guilty sometimes of assuming people know what we're talking about, or like forgetting that somebody's telling us about new or whatever. So forgive me if it is obvious, but let's assume it's not for everyone listening. Let's cover some of the things you just talked about, because you mentioned those different delivery methods, those different terms. And let me just ask you, is it as complicated as it sounds? What are the problems people face? Like, that sounds quite complicated. I reckon some people listening might be listening thinking, yeah, if it is just A to B, fine. But all this other stuff you mentioned, you might be lead generators thinking that sounds like a right ball ache. So let me ask you that: is it a ball ache? Is it complicated?
Yeah, it can be incredibly complicated. Not because it is inherently complicated. It's a bit like we make it complicated, as in not us as in Databall or any sort of system. It's more what it is that you actually want to carry out. So once you start going into all these sort of weird and wonderful lead distribution mechanisms and all these different things that you want to update and stuff, it can get more and more and more complicated. And I would say it's like, we are a lead distribution system is an element of Databall, right? And I would say the number one thing that we get requests on is setting up APIs, or setting up the logic around APIs. And we introduced a marketing operations function into Databall for exactly this reason, because we realized that this is to do with self-service users. We obviously have managed ones that we just do it all for, but self-service users will just hit APIs. They can't, really complicated, they become difficult to set up. You can have stuff like you want a lead delivering to one place and it needs to have a lead update API come back from that to send a lead back into a different campaign to move it somewhere else. And there can be all this sort of logic around it. So the most difficult thing around it all isn't necessarily it's just in the execution of it. It's not necessarily in the logic of it. Like, because I could easily sit and map out on a piece of paper. I have a lead coming in here. This buyer is paying the most. I want it to deliver there. And if it's not, I want it to deliver here. This one has its own cap, its own dedupe, its own suppression. I can build all these different campaigns, have all these individual components. But then it starts to become like each one of those buyers or destinations might have a different API. Some of them can be really complicated APIs. I don't know, typically like something that could happen is, what if you send to one API? So you've got a ping tree and a weighted distribution, and the API responds, or you get a lead update or something happens that tells you this lead was fine, but it's actually, as in it's passed all the verification. But when we tried to call it, it was a different person and they weren't interested, there's like no interest in the product. What would normally happen is that client has rejected it, and now it just delivered to the next one. So you need to start building logic out of what you're going to do in that scenario. Because all that's going to happen is you're going to keep sending a bad lead to every single person in a ping tree. So it's stuff like that until you encounter it, you wouldn't really know how on earth you deal with it. So I think where people are sort of generally fine if they're reasonably technical, setting up a single API that lead can come in, lead go out to. If it starts getting a complicated API, they'll start struggling. And if there's lots of sort of complications within different routings and how leads are going to be sold or delivered in a way, then it can start getting complicated as well.
Yeah.
But we make it complicated. It reminds me of that phrase of, it was about football once that someone said. It was like, it's an incredibly simple thing that's just very complicated by man. We're sort of like, it's
I
the
don't know
same
who said
thing.
that, but I'm just going to guess it's like Johan Cruyff or something. If in doubt, I'll just attribute to someone like that.
Someone like that. How about you could look it up?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, but I guess I don't want to be too negative with this, because we're picking apart sort of the difficult side of it, and it's because, like you say, because we see these problems and we're used to solving these problems for people. That's the whole point. And like you said, we're not trying to sell Databall. It's purely illustrating the fact that we have an operation department because there was a demand to do this kind of stuff like that. It's just purely illustrating an idea. But I guess what I want to sort of come back around to is the fact that although, yeah, we see these problems and we solve them a lot, it serves a very important purpose. Like, what are the benefits of getting your lead distribution sort of like really smooth and working? How can you use it or optimize it to make people more money? That sounds like a really fast question, but like that's what it comes back to. How can we optimize it? I guess. So,
well, I think this is sort of like the whole point of lead distribution technology, which is it's about like automation and efficiency and speed. It's those three things that it's ultimately sort of providing. So it's automating this entire logic of where a lead is best sent to. That's from a buyer side or a seller side.
yeah.
The efficiency is just removing like data being splurged everywhere, or different data being sent to different places, or lots of people messing about with things. And as we know, one of the key facets within lead generation is speed. And so if you can't deliver a lead quickly, you're already losing. So combining those three things, it ultimately means more revenue. I mean, that's why I do it. It's those three things that, they'll lead to more revenue. They lead to better quality leads. It leads to leads going to the right places. If you're collecting sort of the right leads and doing it in the right way, everybody sort of gets what they want from a lead distribution angle, including the consumer.
That's interesting as you're saying. I was thinking that before we started this, we had a little think about what we're calling it, and it's interesting that just the terminology itself is a little bit ambiguous. Like distribution, there's routing, there's orchestration, it's slightly different, but it's part of this kind of idea, and it's all very kind of mathematical in the way that it's put together. Like you think about these numbers and it's like bits of random code being sent to distributions. I guess when you're staring at it, you do think of it in this kind of computed sense, but what you've just said there actually is really important to remember, that it's your technology, and what it's ultimately about is connecting people who want to buy a product with the right other people who want to sell our product to them. It's almost like the complicating this, and obviously it needs to be done in a way that works and automating is smooth, but it's almost like we need to just revert back to what's at the very core of this, building a connection between a person and a company that can sell something. Like that's what it kind of comes down to.
Yeah, and there are scenarios where lead distribution, like no matter what you do, it can just you can't optimize everything. So the biggest thing that we'll find is like the system or thing that you're delivering it to. Like we can't affect that. All we can do is deliver a lead to it. So we've got a client, for example, that's all their clients, of which I don't know how many there are, they're all using like G Sheets, right? Like they literally delivering leads onto Google Sheets. And what they want to do is track the performance on those sheets. Now, I'm sure there's a way if we could get hold of those sheets, we'd be able to figure out a way of, when someone's dicking around with them or whatever, like updating datables, so we could do like a lead update API from them. But that's the client's sheet. We can't do anything. So our client, who is getting leads in, delivering them out immediately, sending a notification, I think via SMS or something, saying like new lead, check the sheet, check your sheet out. And what their biggest frustration is like getting these updates back. And so what they then are saying is, okay, we'll have our client log into Databall and they can go and change the status of the leads. And what we have like different things around it. So their client can log in, but now they've gone from this G sheet to now logging into here to now trying to find individual leads that to match back to a G sheet, to then change the status of that lead. And then they put their own reason for rejecting the lead, which removes this like standardization that you might want of running reports of, like putting them all into categories and things. And ultimately, what that's all actually driven by is sending to an entity that probably shouldn't be used for Like, you know, I don't know what they're doing, but it's not a CRM. They're trying to use like Google Sheets as a CRM effectively. But you sort of can't, and it's not, Google Sheets is never going to be used like that. So this is sort of another facet that can lead to problems with lead distribution. Is it the sort of weird winky wanky things that you end up delivering leads to? And we'll have other ones that other systems that you deliver to, they can't take like any sort of volume of leads in any time frame. I don't understand why. Like, that's just their system, the way it's been built. Like, these systems might have been built like 15, 20 years ago or something, even 10 years ago, and time moves on quickly and stuff, evolves and gets quicker. So we've got another client who, I can't remember what the volume is. It's something like, if you deliver more than 9 leads in a minute, like, the API fails. So we have to come up with like scenarios. Okay, so how are we going to throttle this thing to make sure that we never deliver? So they're collecting like, I don't know, 400 leads, maybe not that many. Let's say they're collecting 60 leads a minute and trying to deliver it down at 9 leads. And it's like, this whole thing is just so like, so now we have to, and this is the point, like, how are you going to solve that problem? So I mean, I know how to solve it because we've had to solve it for the client, but effectively that's create a schedule of forwarding that will deliver like a certain leads per minute, but you end up with this massive backlog of leads that's just constantly growing. I don't know when that will go. They just have to stop delivering at some point and try and get through them all. But these are the sort of weird, a lot of the problems in lead distribution are actually caused by things that you're delivering leads to. And it can be like SOAP APIs when you're setting them up, which are like really old APIs that were custom built by people. Not all of them are like this, but a lot were. And it requires like actual development to build an API for it. You can't just go in and go like choose posts, this URL, map these fields, blah, blah, blah. And once you dig into this and sort of know it, unless you've got like, marketing operations person or a front end developer, something like that, you just struggle with this stuff.
I wonder if people listening to this will be thinking right now, like, some people will be like, understanding exactly what you're talking about. Like, yes, I'm sure, like, we've got a simple set, but some people will be thinking like, maybe people who are new to it or relatively new or wanting to improve the tissue abuse, like, maybe terrified by some of the ideas you discussed today. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, this is the whole point is of, I mean, not every bit of lead generation needs speed, right? Like, if someone's books an appointment, you don't need speed, or I don't know, some other mechanism that you're not, I've not thought of why you don't need it. But generally, if a lead is being collected and it has intent and it's beyond like, I don't know, a form of some kind, that person just wants contacting.
Yeah.
And we all know the speed to lead thing, right? And what you want to know as a buyer, like the end buyer, is, can I actually even sell to this person? So you need all the shit stuff removing so that you know whether you can actually sell to them. And if you're a lead generator, you want to get it delivered as quickly as humanly possible. Make sure it's a real person that can be sold to. And this is really all lead distribution is doing. And the end entities buying it, which is some of the stuff you might be talking about, like, if you've got like Google Sheets and you're trying to use that as a CRM, I mean, I'm sure, it has its benefits in some ways, but the reality is, if you're being serious about lead generation, you need serious systems to do it with. Like, you've got to create feedback loops. You need webhooks between different things. You need lead update APIs. You need these different ways of distributing and receiving and, creating like an entire information loop between the whole process. Because the moment you don't, the whole thing breaks down. It starts becoming difficult.
Yeah. I think one of my favourite analogies I've ever heard for this, and I approach this from someone who is probably more concerned with the front end of it, the running the adverts, the generating the leads, the creating, that kind of thing. But someone, I read once an analogy and it kind of said, imagine you're a lead generator marketer and but like in this scenario, you're actually a chef. You're creating an amazing meal. You're going out there, you've got the fanciest ingredients, you've got an amazing chef, and you're cooking this incredible meal. And then it said, whatever happens, it's like if that meal gets to the prospective lead or the person eating it and it's cold, however good the meal is in the first place, it's going to be rubbish. You're not going to get a good review. They're not going to come back a second time. And I just thought it was like a really simplified way of looking at it, but I quite liked it because, yeah, you can generate these amazing leads, but it's like if they're not getting to the right people at the right time, they're not going to become a sale. They're not going to be happy with it. And despite the sort of complicated side of looks at today, it's quite nice to just revert it back to something that's so simple, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, and this, people can misunderstand this as well, which is like the intent behind leads. So I just want to give you another example. So in Datable, you can drag and drop files of data, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I don't know, if you've got a bunch of list data or data that was collected over like 24 hours or something, and you can either drop it on an FTP that's just set up on every campaign, or you can drag and drop it onto the system as a supplier. And we throttle that, right? Like, and depending on like the volume of leads, with more we'll throttle it, and we recommend people don't upload like more than a certain amount of leads. But every single day, we'll have a supplier that comes on our support chat that said, I've been waiting 3 minutes, or 5 minutes, 10 minutes for a file to be processed. And be like, how big was this file? So I had one yesterday doing it, and I just happened to go on to the support thing. It's like 15,000 records. And now in my mind, all I think is how much intent is behind that 15,000 records you've just uploaded in one go. Like, why are you so bothered? Now, I get it, right? Like, there must be an order or something that there'll be like a call center that has ordered that data, and they've, they want to get it to them by a certain time or something. We should have loaded it earlier. So the problem is again, it's this thing of like us humans making it like really complicated. In my mind, I would never sacrifice the speed or the quality of a high intent lead that's been delivered like via an API on its own to somewhere else. And it takes absolute priority. And this is a thing with like a lead distribution platform, is that people then expect you can just dump 20,000 records on it and you're going to get the same effect. It's just not going to work like that. You wouldn't even want to build a system like that. Because you would never want to impact the speed or the quality of anything else. It comes in like a hierarchy of intent, effectively. And that's exactly how systems like this are built. So that people, the consumers, it's like looking after them as much as it is the lead generators and the lead buyers that are using them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I said at the start of this, just to bring it around, we had a rough roadmap of where we were going to go, but we probably weren't going to stick to it. I'm trying to work out whether we have done what, how, and why. Have we answered all those three things? I think maybe not directly, but in a roundabout manner, we've covered them. But
yeah, I think in summary, it gets as complicated as you make it. The ultimate aim is like speed, efficiency, and automation. And obviously that leads to growth and scale and revenue and things like that from either a buyer or seller side. And one thing for me, I think of the intent, and that's, the way leads, like the hierarchy they should probably be delivered in. And there's another type of lead distribution, which is it's still lead distribution, which is people don't even receive it on API. They get it via email, or they get sent a CSV. It's a bit like putting it on G Sheets, similar thing, but rather than in real time, they'll get, in the same way we said, like bulk deliveries happen on the system, they'll also happen out of the system.
I wonder if people who are doing things like, I don't know, uploading big lists on G Sheets are going to be listening to the podcast. I don't know, maybe they will be, but I imagine.
Well, yeah, because I think what happens is people create blends of intent effectively, because they'll put it in, let's say, I don't know, you've got 20 agents sat there in a dialer. You've got to keep them active, so there's always blends of intent.
I mean, yeah, if you blend it in, it's a different thing. I'm talking about people who are literally just operating on Google Sheets and sending, like, I guess they're not going as deep into this. That's a different subject, I suppose. But yeah, I think I think we've just about scratched the surface of lead distribution there. I think we're going to have to revisit this and maybe, I don't know, we'll come up with a new title. Maybe you're listening and you want this to cover something specifically, by all means send it through. But yeah, like lead distribution in one, I guess is what I'll have to call that. But for the time being, until we get more of those, that was episode 78, lead distribution, what, how, why. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.